Governor Schwarzenegger says his prison reform plan to ease severe overcrowding in the state's prisons needs more time to work.
The right way to go is to build as quickly as possible the 53,000 beds and also to send as many as possible out of the state, because outside our state, there are facilities that are half empty. So why should they not absorb some of our inmates? And this way we can relieve our overcrowding.
That is part of his plan to ease overcrowding. A panel of judges may put a cap on the number of inmates allowed in California's prisons, which would, of course, mean prisoners would be released early. The governor is asking those judges to give his plan more time to work. The three-judge panel will meet in the next few months, I should say, and they will decide whether releasing inmates early is the best option.
Eyewitness News in high definition continues.
Thousands of prison inmates turned loose early in California. The governor and other state officials are trying to keep a judicial panel from doing just that, saying it would pose a threat to communities across the state. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Tuzzi.
I'm Micah Ullman in for Mark Brown. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of many public officials predicting dire consequences if federal judges cap the state's prison population and order the early release of many inmates. They say they have a better idea to solve prison overcrowding. Our Sacramento Bureau Chief Nanette Miranda live in the state capitol with more on their plan. Nanette.
Well, you could call it a preemptive strike. The governor today warning federal judges that our streets and neighborhoods could become more dangerous if they order the early release of felons.
We got to stop those judges.
Governor Schwarzenegger is worried a panel of 3 federal judges will cap the state prison population, forcing the early release of as many as 40,000 inmates statewide. It's an option they're considering because, as state corrections video shows, California prisons are severely overcrowded with about 172,000 inmates crammed into spaces built for half of that. The governor urged the judges today to look at the landmark prison reform bill he signed in May, which builds 53,000 new prison beds and continues the temporary transfer of inmates to out-of-state facilities.
Releasing criminals back into our streets will be a public safety disaster, and it is absolutely unacceptable.
Officers say if the release happens, they could be stretched thin, considering they already have to deal with the early release of county inmates, many of whom reoffend.
If you cap the state prison system, you have a capped county system, and you release 40,000 people in the community with a 70% recidivism rate, do the math.
Some inmate rights advocates say early release is the answer because low-level drug offenders and parole violators arrested on technicalities should not be in state prison.
We're incarcerating people who shouldn't be incarcerated. There are alternatives for these offenders.
But the California Corrections Secretary says there are no guarantees violent offenders will be left off the early release list. So part of the 40,000 may in fact include violent offenders?
It could.
Victims' rights groups like the YWCA Rape Crisis Center of Silicon Valley says it's appalling violent offenders could be let out early.
That is frightening, and I hope that they rethink that. And if they don't, then yes, the answer to your question is, yeah, our streets will feel less safe.
And complicating matters, the governor's prison relief plan is being challenged in court, so the federal judges who meet in 2 weeks may not have a choice but to release the inmates early. Live in Sacramento, Nanette Miranda, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Nanette, thank you. Governor Schwarzenegger says he needs more time to tackle the problem of prison overcrowding. A panel of 3 judges is considering the early release of some inmates to free up space in the state's correction system. Back in May, remember, the governor signed a prison reform plan that would add more than 50,000 prison beds, but that's going to take a while. Today, the governor met with law enforcement officials from around the state, and he says a big problem is the number of repeat offenders.
What we need to do is cut that recidivism rate from 70% to maybe a national average, which is around 40%. That would already take thousands and thousands of inmates out of the prison.
The governor says the number of reoffenders is the highest in the nation. But he says it will be a year and a half before the new beds are ready. The 3-judge panel will meet to hear evidence in the next few months. The San Francisco Zoo will reopen its Lion House exhibit tomorrow. The attraction was closed last December after a trainer was attacked by a 350-pound tiger during a routine feeding. The tiger grabbed the trainer's arm while horrified visitors watched. Extra safety measures have been added ever since then, including a food drop box that prevents the animals from making contact with the trainer's hands. The new feeding demonstrations will take place at 2 p.m. 6 days a week.
Governor Schwarzenegger today joined the chorus of criticism of a possible plan to release prison inmates early in order to alleviate the state's prison overcrowding problem. The plan is just one idea being considered by a federal panel. KTVU's Ken Pritchett is following the story. He's live in Martinez now with more on today's developments. Ken?
Well, Frank, the state prison overcrowding problem creates a backlog of inmates at county jails, including here in Contra Costa County. And one solution, as you mentioned, is to put a cap on the state prison population. But many say that would make the problem worse. There are 170,000 inmates in California prisons, and every prison is crowded. A three-judge federal panel will decide whether inmates should be released to ease a problem long ignored by lawmakers in Sacramento.
We got to go and work together.
Governor Schwarzenegger says the judges must give his prison reform package passed in May time to work. And Contra Costa Sheriff Warren Roop agrees.
If the panel were to draw a line and say, today, you have to release 40,000 plus state prisoners, the results from our perspective would be catastrophic.
He says a mass influx of inmates would overwhelm county social and health services, and a cap on the number of inmates would still not free up bed space.
Those prisoners that were sentenced to state prison would be in limbo. We wouldn't have room for them. The state could not accept them.
The sheriff favors the prison reform package, which would build county beds to transition prisoners back into society.
When someone's released from the state system, they go back to the county of their last residence. So we're going to get these folks.
Many are counting on those judges agreeing that they should wait for the governor's plan that he signed into law to work, but that plan will be challenged in court on Monday. The three-judge federal panel will hear arguments about the cap on the prison population on September 24th. In Martinez, Ken Pritchett, KTVU Channel 2 News.